Hipperson and I play Mrs Crocombe for English Heritage's YouTube series, The Victorian Way.
Oh, hello.
And this is
Annie Gray, and I'm the consultant on the series.
This is our follow-up video to the lemon cheesecakes that we made earlier in the year. And the most common question we get about the dishes we make is often about the names of the dishes, because some of them are rather strange in that the lemon cheesecakes didn't actually have any
Cheese in.
And this is also known as an apple cheese, but it doesn't have any
Cheese in. There's no cheese anywhere near it, in fact.
Doesn't even taste of cheese. Here we have some plum puddings.
No plums.
We have plum cake.
Absolutely no plums.
And sugar plums.
No plums. I mean, really, no plum whatsoever.
So why do we have these strange names of dishes when they don't have the ingredients in them?
Well, in the case of lemon cheesecakes, it's because the lemon cheesecake formed a solid mass, a lot like a cheese, which is the same with this, the gâteau de pomme.
My favourite recipe, gâteau de pomme or apple cheese.
Ah, yes. So this is also known as a gâteau de pomme and is in Mrs Crocombe's cookbook. And we've had a few comments about that, haven't we?
Yes. Some of you have pointed out quite correctly that it is not very good French, that gâteau de pomme should in fact be gâteau aux pommes, and you're absolutely correct. The thing is that Mrs Crocombe copied this down from a book by Eliza Acton called Modern Cookery, and Eliza Acton called it
Gâteau de pomme.
So we had to call it
Gâteau de pomme. So we're going to continue to call it gâteau de pomme because that's the Victorian name for it. Now, what about the plum cake and the plum pudding?
Well, these are plum puddings, which today would also be known as Christmas puddings, and the plum cake, often today known as Christmas cake, both of them are called plum for the same reason, and that's that plum just meant any form of dried fruit. So plum pudding is just a dried fruit pudding, plum cake, just a dried fruit cake. The same is true of things like plum pottage as well, which doesn't have any plums in, but does have lots of dried fruit in.
So we're going to continue a little bit with this theme, focusing on the plum puddings, which also known as Christmas pudding, which have also been known as figgy pudding.
Yes, so if you want to add another layer of confusion, if you're not confused already, plum pudding without plums in, also known as Christmas pudding by Mrs Crocombe's time, sometimes known as figgy pudding, as you will hear in the carol. Which one is it? We Wish You a Merry Christmas?
Yes.
Yeah.
We want some figgy pudding, and we want some right now.
I've always found that really rude.
I think you should say please. So we're going to actually make a fig pudding.
With figs.
So figgy pudding.
Christmas pudding.
Yes.
Plum pudding. Not fig pudding. No figs.
Right. But fig pudding
has figs, and also is a very nice alternative to plum pudding, Christmas pudding, if you don't like it, although why wouldn't you?
I don't know. Who doesn't like Christmas pudding? So we're going to start making now our fig pudding with
actual figs.
Yes. So, for this recipe, you will need
3 ounces or 85 grams of fresh figs, or indeed dried figs. 3 ounces or 85 grams of breadcrumbs. 3 ounces or 85 grams of caster sugar. A pinch each of ground cinnamon and nutmeg. 3 tablespoons of brandy or another fortified wine. 1/4 tablespoon of bicarbonate of soda. 85 grams or 3 ounces of suet. Something to grease your mould. We used butter. And then to serve, you might want wine sauce, cream or custard.
Now, the original recipe is from Mrs Crocombe's notebook recipe book.
In fact, nearly all of the recipes that we've just shown are in that book. So you'll also find the Christmas pudding or plum pudding with no plums, the plum cake also
with no plums,
and the apple cheese.
No cheese, also known as gâteau de pomme, one of my very favourites. So here we have the original fig pudding receipt. Take equal quantities of fig, breadcrumbs, suet and sugar. Mince all up fine together. Season with cinnamon, nutmeg and a little brandy. Put in a pinch of sea soda, carbonate soda, Butter a mould and boil it for 3 hours or more according to size. So it's a little vague on actual numbers, quantities.
It's very vague. At the moment, you might only want to make a small pudding because we're all having very small gatherings. But if you wanted to make an enormous fig pudding, you'd make an enormous fig pudding. Really, all you need to do is to weigh your figs and then weigh everything else in proportion. But to make it easier for the modern cook, in the book we've put in a modernised version using actual weights and measures.
Very good. And for this one, we're going to use fresh figs, although you don't have to if you don't want to.
No, you can use dried figs. Personally, I would soak the dried figs either in milk or in brandy or in ginger cordial, something like that, just to sort of give them a bit of rehydration. You could just use hot water, to be honest. But I think fresh figs are more in keeping with Mrs Crocombe at Audley End.
Certainly, yes. Fresh figs like this would have been grown by Lord Braybrook's gardeners in the hothouses. They had hothouses that were heated by hot water pipes, and therefore they could grow things out of season. So figs at Christmas time would be highly likely and highly possible, and a way of showing your status. So when you're having a meal, you would have fruit and occasionally maybe vegetables that were grown out of season to show off that you could afford all of this. And of course the poor couldn't.
It was quite a craze as well. One of the things I've always noticed about Victorian Christmas menus in particular is there's nearly always asparagus on the table in the middle of December. And asparagus today is in season, what, April, May?
Yeah, springtime.
Yeah.
But would they have tasted as nice?
Well, no. And the Victorians were aware that things out of season didn't necessarily taste as good. Queen Victoria, who was an avid kitchen garden visitor, would go down to the kitchen gardens, especially those at Windsor, and she'd go round them and she'd taste the cherries and she'd have a good look at all of the vegetables and she'd discuss with the head gardener, and then she'd write in her journal that she felt the cherries were particularly fine, just right for serving to the ambassador of wherever. So the Victorians did know things tasted better when they were naturally grown at peak. But on the other hand, who could resist putting something like a pineapple on the Christmas table? Let's face it, a lot of things like fruit and vegetables were cooked anyway, so that flavour difference wouldn't have been apparent. Mrs Crocombe's cookery book is full of ways to transform your fruit and vegetables in interesting and innovative ways.
And preserving them as well.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, the preserved pineapples are beautiful, like little jewels.
So we're going to actually make this fig pudding, which has figs in it, in our basin, which we've lined with butter already. But you could mould it. Moulding is very fashionable, very popular, such as I've done with my gâteau de pommes. So this has been put in a mould just here, and I've also got a quince cheese, very similar, ready to turn out. That's in a mould just there. So we could have used any of the moulds, really.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we used to find when working at Audley End House was that there's a huge dresser at Audley End House and it's full of beautiful copper moulds, and people would come in and they'd go, goodness me, wow, didn't the Victorians eat a lot of jelly? And the answer really is, well, no, not really, because an awful lot of the moulds aren't suitable for jelly. If you've got a mould with a hole in or something, then the jelly's just going to collapse. Actually, the Victorians would use moulds for anything that was mouldable. So the plum pudding with no plums, the gâteau de pommes, a set cream, a blancmange, savoury pudding.
Oh yes, savoury things.
I mean, potted meat. If you can imagine moulding it, it would go in a mould. Now, I've just put in here all of the ingredients apart from the suet. I have to admit to cheating, I've used this nutmeg grater, which is very modern, but, well, this is about 200 years old, and quite frankly, we do want to eat it.
Yes.
So I'm going to just put in now the suet, and then the brandy just to moisten it. So 3 tablespoons of brandy. 1, 2, 3. And if you don't drink, you could just put in water, or you could put in a non-alcoholic ginger beer, or indeed you could just use something like blackcurrant cordial.
That would go quite well, actually, with the fig flavour, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and you could use fig juice or one of those sort of, anything with a deep, dark, kind of rich flavour. It's really just to give the pudding some moisture.
Well, that looks like it's blended really well together.
Yeah, it's quite dry for a pudding mixture, I always think. You look at this and think, ooh, used to pudding mixtures being a bit sloppier, but this is quite a solid pudding.
So this pudding would be served at what time in the meal?
This would be towards the end of the meal. So in a Victorian dinner in the 1880s, it was quite a long meal, many, many courses. And you would start with your soup and you'd go on to fish and it would, you'd be there for several hours. And towards the end, you'd get things like this, which are sweet dishes, but they're not dessert. Dessert was fruit, it was nuts, it was ice cream. So you might well have some actual figs for your dessert. This would be a sort of sweet entremet, as it was known. So very, very similar to the Christmas pudding, the plum pudding, which obviously...
And the plum pudding would have been eaten throughout the season,
yes,
not just for Christmas.
Very much so. So plum puddings were incredibly symbolic in British culture. Beef and plum pudding was the symbol of Britishness and had been way back as far as the 18th century. You often got satires with plum pudding, always with its sort of characteristic cannonball shape, and then the roast beef as well. If you look at Gilray or Rowlandson or any of the satirists, they often use it. And plum pudding was eaten at pretty much any banquet.
Just a spoon to scrape off the back, thank you.
And it was also eaten throughout the whole of the winter, and it was, I mean, it's pretty ubiquitous, really. It's one of those things where people today just sort of eat it at Christmas and don't really like it and aren't really sure and look for lighter alternatives, but I think they're eating it wrong.
We should eat it with cheese?
Eat it with cheese, eat it with beef, or even better, fry it and eat it with bacon for your Boxing Day breakfast.
Right, so this is our pudding cloth that has been soaked and wrung out and then floured to make sure it doesn't stick. So that's going to go around the top here. We're going to give it some space. I'm going to find the end of the string. We're going to give it some space in the middle there. So we've got a little fold so it can rise. And then we're going to tie it round here. Of course, the basin's got a lip. So we're going to make sure, do the second one in there to keep it tight. Handle to get it out once it's finished, and it's got to go in for 3 hours.
Yes, so it needs to go in at a rolling boil for 3 hours. It is really important that the water continues to boil the whole time so that the pudding cooks all the way through.
And water halfway up.
Yeah, halfway up or 3/4 of the way up, it's fine as to which one.
And most important thing, do not let it boil dry.
Do not let it boil dry. Terrible things ensue, like curtains on fire and burning bits of the garden, and I'm speaking from experience, obviously. Anyway, less of that. By the magic of television, we shall now take this away and then come back again within seconds, but 3 hours will pass in YouTube time.
Right then, moment of truth. There we are. Look at that. Can we eat it?
Yes, I think we should.
Oh, very good.
I've made some wine sauce to go with this, which is another recipe from Mrs Crocombe's manuscript book. And it's just sherry and a sugar syrup, some lemon juice and some apricot jam, which is all boiled together to make this sort of rather lovely sauce. It's a lot nicer than things like brandy butter or quite heavy, boozy white sauces.
So this would be served traditionally with a wine sauce or cream or custard?
Yeah, anything you wanted to really. It just needs something to sort of moisten it and to be a bit of a flavour contrast. And I can see that you're shaking.
I want to try it.
Here's a spoon.
Thank you.
Beautiful colour, isn't it?
It is. I don't see this as an alternative to Christmas pudding, but then I'm a massive fan of Christmas pudding.
I think Christmas pudding is the best thing about Christmas, apart from the plum cake, the Christmas cake.
Reminds me a little bit of Weetabix.
I'd be quite interested to try it with a really strong cheese, actually. It's a very sweet sauce.
I like it. I like the sauce.
You would.
I don't dislike this. I think you should all try it just to see what it's like.
Lots of you have cooked the recipes from Mrs Crocombe's cookbook, and you've been kind enough to send us pictures, and we really, really love seeing them. It's absolutely brilliant to see these recipes from 100 or 150 years ago being brought back to life, not just by us, but by you as well.
So please do keep sending them in, and because we love receiving them. And there we have our fig, which does have figs in it.
Fig pudding, the Victorian way.
Yes.
Please tag English Heritage if you are going to post your pictures to us, or indeed if you've got any other comments. They're just English Heritage on Instagram or on Twitter or on Facebook or anything else that you choose to be on. Please enjoy the rest of the Victorian Way videos as well, and I think from both of us, all it remains to say.
Oh, and Beth,
and
you
Beth.
can just about see down here.
is Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
ways to transform your fruit and vegetables in interesting and innovative ways, then you just make an enormous big pooing.
So we want
Pooing?
I've never had Weetabix with cheese on it.
You've never had Weetabix with cheese on it? You can spread the Weetabix with butter and then have cheese.
Mad,
okay.
Right.
I just forget I said that.
You can't walk into the video halfway through and then walk out again. Right.
I've got to be professional.